Hello, welcome. Hi, everybody. Welcome to LSAT Free Prep Hour. My name is Allison Bell, and I'll be your instructor today. I would love to meet all of you. So I'm going to send you a chat, and I'd love for you to respond in the chat. Where are you joining us from today? And where are you in your LSAT journey? So are you just starting out? Are you preparing for a retake? Are you somewhere in the middle? What brought you here today? Ooh, all right. Hi, Takesha. I hope I'm saying your name right. Let me know if I'm not. Taking the test in 9 days. That's exciting. Got a June test taker in the room. Who else is here? Awesome, Nicole. Exciting to just be starting out. That's great. Hi, Renee. Welcome from Canada. That's awesome. A couple of folks just starting out. Today's content should be really helpful regardless of whether you're taking the test in about a week or you're just starting out. There will be something for everyone. Thank you for the introduction, Ariana. Fremont, that's not too far from me. I live in Oakland, California. Great, keep them coming. I'm going to go ahead and get us started with today's lesson. So first, I just wanted to share, if you're looking for some more free prep options, we have a few more available to you that are really great. One is it's possible to try the first session of our 10-session LSAT course for free. It's a 3-hour live class that covers the introduction to logic games and logical reasoning. And it is also possible to try what's called LSAT Interact, which is our self-study interactive video course. You can try a sample of that for free on our website. So the link is there if you're interested in checking out either of those resources. Oh, Ariana, that's cool. So today we're going to be focused on logical reasoning, and in particular, we're going to be focused on strong language in logical reasoning and how to handle it. Strong language in logical reasoning does not mean swearing. I'd love to know if you could tell me in the chat, when you think of language strength in logical reasoning, strong words or weak words, what comes to mind for you? What are some examples? Start with some examples of what are some strong words in logical reasoning. Put them in the chat. Great. Rufus says all, definitely. Must. Good. Make this a little bigger. What else? Always, that's a great one, Renee. Good. I'll add a few to the list. Words like only or even most can be a pretty strong word depending on what the other answer options have. We can also have strong relationships that don't necessarily have an individual word that's super strong, but for example, if-then relationships are strong because they're an absolute guarantee that if one thing happens, then another thing will happen. Another type of relationship that's very strong is when we have sort of a quantitative relationship, like saying that two things are proportional or that one is the inverse of the other. That's a very precise mathematical definition. So that suggests a really strong relationship. And another really strong relationship is when we see language that definitively states that one thing causes another. We also will see language that is considered weaker. in the logical reasoning section. So this might be language like some or sometimes. It might say at least in part is a pretty common one. Instead of saying something causes, we might say something is a factor, which implies there could be other factors. Great, Ari said in the chat, may or might rather than will. I'll add will over here to the strong language category. Now, here's the reason I'm bringing this up today. On almost every question type in logical reasoning, language strength is going to be important. It's also going to be important in reading comprehension. But there's a myth about language strength on the LSAT, and that myth is that strong language is always bad, that it's always a red flag. And that is not true in all situations or all question types. So our goal for today is going to be to tease out some of the subtleties for when strong language is appropriate or even good on an LSAT question, and when it might be appropriate for us to look for weaker language and eliminate answers based on strong language. So there are two major factors that go into that thought process of deciding whether I want strong language or I want weak language, or it doesn't really matter. The first factor is the question type. There are some question types where strong language is generally going to be expected, and there are some question types where strong language is generally not going to be expected. Question types where strong language is generally okay or expected include sufficient assumption questions and principal support questions. Question types where strong language is usually kind of a problem and we might expect to look for weaker language are most strongly supported inference questions and necessary assumption questions. That said, this isn't a hard and fast rule, particularly when it comes to these question types that I've put in weaker language, because there's another factor that matters a lot, and that is the language strength that you see in the stimulus itself. So in that little paragraph at the top, the argument or the set of the facts is going to influence the language strength that you want in your answer choices. Generally speaking, if the language in the stimulus is pretty strong, then it's probably going to be more reasonable to expect strong language in your answer choices, even if you're dealing with an inference question or a necessary assumption question. If the language strength in your stimulus is pretty weak, then you're likely going to be expecting weaker language in your answer choices. And this is particularly true for question types that don't fall in either of these buckets, but where language strength can matter a lot. So for example, on matching questions or identify the conclusion questions, we'll often be able to eliminate answer choices because they don't match the language strength of the stimulus. But we won't know until we read the question itself whether we're looking for strong or weak language. It's going to depend on what the stimulus says. So what we're going to do together today is a sampling of a variety of different question types that will allow us to get familiar with when the LSAT likes for us to have stronger language and when the LSAT would prefer for us to eliminate answers with strong language. So I'm going to go through a series of questions with you. For each of these questions, I'm going to give you about 1.5 minutes to read the question yourself. Please do not put your answer in the chat. Once that time is up, I will launch a poll and you'll have an opportunity to anonymously share your answer. And then we'll discuss the language strength in the question, and we'll also go over how we would arrive at the correct answer. So with that, let's go ahead and get started with our first problem. Let's do this one, and I'll give you about 1.5 minutes. All right, that's about a minute and a half. I'm going to launch a poll. Please let me know what answer you would pick if you had to decide right now. Got about half of you voted. I'd love to get some more votes in before we chat. All right, thank you to everybody who voted. We've got a pretty wide range of answers out there. So what I'd like to ask you all to do is to show me a little bit of your thinking about the language strength in the stimulus to start with. So you should have access, I believe, at the top of your screen to some annotation tools. If you go to where it says you are viewing Allison Bell's screen and view options, you can select annotate. And I want to invite you to just write directly on the screen. You can highlight or circle. What are some of the words that struck you as particularly strong or particularly weak in the stimulus? So in the paragraph at the top. Let's take a moment to do that. And if you don't have access to the annotation, just tell me in the chat what are some of the words that stood out to you as strong or weak. Okay, so I'm seeing only and never, definitely both very strong words. But we also have some softer words like can and sometimes, absolutely. So those are great things to be paying attention to. And what I learned from that is that this text could probably support some pretty strongly worded answer choices. But it could also support some more softly worded answer choices based off words like sometimes or can. This is an example of what we call an inference question, and the question type is most strongly supported. Generally speaking, the weaker an answer choice is, the easier it's going to be to prove that there's support for it. That said, it's important on this question type to pay attention to the language strength of the stimulus, because if we have words like never or only, then we can support some pretty strong inferences. So what I want to do is, as I go through the answer choices, I want to check out the language strength of the answer choices and see if it matches back to appropriately matched language strength in the stimulus. So let's see what that would look like. So answer choice A says West Nile virus will never be a common disease among humans. So if I check back to see what I know about West Nile virus in humans, I know that humans do sometimes catch it, but it's not abundant enough in human blood to infect a mosquito. I don't know about this because I do see the word never, but this isn't about humans never catching it or it never being a common disease. It's saying that in human blood, we don't get enough of the virus to infect a mosquito. So it seems like all we know right now is that humans do sometimes catch the West Nile virus. And it seems like it's possible that it will someday become a common disease amongst humans. We don't quite have enough evidence to support this really strong word of never. So I'm going to eliminate answer choice A. Answer choice B has another strong word saying it's most common in parts of North America with the highest density of mosquitoes. So again, I'm going to check the text to see, do I have proof of that? I see North America is mentioned, that it was spread to North America in the 1990s. And that is actually all that I know about North America. So I don't really have any evidence to suggest which parts of North America the virus is common or not common in. So I'm going to cross this off. Answer choice C, some people who become infected with West Nile virus never show symptoms of illness. This is an interesting one that is kind of softly worded with regard to how many people, but really strongly worded with regard to their symptoms. So I'm going to look back to see what it says about symptoms, and I see nothing about human symptoms, so I'm going to cross this one off. Answer choice D, West Nile virus infects more people in Northern Africa than it does in North America. So this is an example of comparative language. And when I see comparative language, I just want to check to see if this comparison was provided in the text. I know that it originated in Northern Africa, or at least that's where it was initially detected, but it's not clear how many people get it in Northern Africa versus North America. So I'm going to cross that off. Answer choice E is pretty strongly worded too. It says it was not carried via an infected person. So just like definite, hard, no, not carried via an infected person. So do we have the language strength to support this? Well, if I go back to the text, I know that I have a very strong word saying it never becomes abundant enough to infect a mosquito. And I know that birds and mammals only are infected through mosquito bites. So it can't go from a human to a mosquito, and birds and mammals can only get it through a mosquito. And so we know that it was not carried via an infected person. Had to have been carried via an infected bird or mammal or a mosquito, because humans don't pass the virus along, right? Like if a human has West Nile virus, they can't give it to a mosquito, and the mosquito can't then give it to a bird via a human. So correct answer here is E. And this is a great example of a question where we have to pay careful attention to the language strength in the stimulus so that we can use it to evaluate our answers. Let me know in the chat what questions you have about this one, anything that doesn't make sense, or answer choices you'd like for me to go over again. I'll pause for about 10 seconds to give you a chance to let me know what's on your mind. All right. If there are no questions, we're gonna go ahead and take a look at another example. All right, go ahead and give this question a try. Again, I'll give you a little bit longer for this one. I'll give you about 2 minutes. All right, everybody, I'm gonna launch a poll and ask you to let me know what you're thinking for this problem. All right, thank you. Tell me again in the chat, what are some of the strength indicators that you were paying attention to from the stimulus? Good, yeah, so I see a lot of people saying all. Infrequently versus a great deal versus moderately, definitely. So this is an example of a matching problem. And matching problems often are going to allow you to eliminate at least some answers based off of language strength. So that's a great starting point when you're evaluating answer choices, is to notice what is the language strength of each premise, what is the language strength of the conclusion, and what can I eliminate. So if I'm taking a look at this argument, I see here's my conclusion, and my three premises are all, and each. So I can go through these answer choices and analyze whether the language strength is a match from the premise perspective first. So I'm looking for two alls at the outset. So I notice right away, answer choice A has all and some, so that doesn't seem like a likely match. B has all and all, C has all and all, and D has all and all, so does E. So everything seems like it, works okay for the first two premises except answer choice A. Then I get this conclusion that suggests Rosa's dogs are moderate barkers. And I know that that is sort of the middle ground between barking a great deal and barking infrequently. So I'm looking for an answer choice that sort of also is striking a middle ground in its conclusion. So answer choice B, I see that moderately toxic seems to be kind of like a blend of two things, so I'm going to keep it. Answer choice C seems a little different though. It's talking about two different groups and some live in one place and some live in the other, rather than striking a middle ground between them. So I'm going to cross that off. D, similarly, instead of saying like, here's this middle ground, it's saying Bob knows these two different things, which is different from our conclusion. So I'm going to cross that off. And E is worded a little bit too specifically. It's saying half are Canisius and half are Connies. This is more of, we're going to meet in the middle somewhere, but it's not specifically your 50% allowed barker and 50% an infrequent barker. So I would cross this one off as well. So this is a great example of how we can use language strength, particularly within the components of a matching problem, oftentimes to eliminate quite a few answer choices. And notice I did that on this difficult match the flaw question without even specifically identifying what the flaw was. I just used the structure of this argument and the language strength to make those eliminations. Nice job on this one, everybody. Any questions here? All right, let me clear this off and we'll try another. Okay, again, I'll give you about a minute and a half for this one. All right, I will launch a poll again. And let me know what you think about this one. All right, thanks everybody. Looks like we're split between two answer choices. So this question type is an identify the conclusion question. And our task on this question type is to specifically find the sentence or part of a sentence that expresses the author's main point and match it as closely as possible in meaning to an answer choice. So when I'm looking through this text, the first thing that I want to do is just identify which part is the conclusion. So it starts off with some background information. Every business strives to increase its productivity. Here's why. And then we get this word but. On the LSAT, the word but is often a transition into the author's opinion. So in this case, the author is kind of offering a contrast. The economist is offering a contrast to this opening line and saying not all efforts to increase productivity are beneficial, and then gives an example of why they might not be beneficial. Because we get some support, some explanation here at the bottom of why this might not be beneficial, I'm going to identify our conclusion as this sentence right here. And this is where language strength can come in. So when I take a look at this conclusion, I notice that it's not very strongly worded. It says not all efforts are beneficial. That's pretty vague. It could be like most efforts, it could be some efforts, but I'm expecting to see something less than an absolute statement as the expression of my conclusion. And that's helpful in quickly eliminating answer choices at a quick glance. So I see really strong language in a bunch of these answer choices. I see answer choice A uses the word cannot, answer choice C uses the word only, answer choice D uses the word no, and so that leaves me with answer choice B and E. And I noticed that answer choice E is focused primarily on the premise rather than the conclusion. So I would select answer choice B, which is a good match for the language strength because not all efforts are beneficial. So some are going to fail to be beneficial, and that matches up with the reasoning in the original conclusion. Notice that it's a little bit of a rewording of the conclusion, but it expresses the same idea. And that's often going to be the case for these identify the conclusion statements. So one great thing to get comfortable with is this sort of flipping or finding the inverse of language. So not all are beneficial translates into some are not beneficial, and being able to recognize those two as related to each other or essentially saying the same thing is a really valuable skill on LR. All right, let me know what questions you have on this one. Okay. If there are no questions, let's try another one. Great question from Ari. In ID, the conclusion, are the author's opinion always the conclusion? Yes, although it is possible for the author to use an opinion to support an opinion. So for example, I could say, dogs are fun, therefore dogs are the best animals. Those are both opinions. So in that case, I would then have to decide which one is receiving the support and which is giving the support. So an opinion is, the conclusion has to be an opinion expressed by the author, but that's not quite enough to be sure that that is the opinion. We also want to check whether it has support. All right, let's take a look at another question. Again, I'll give you about a minute and a half. Oh, sorry, I see one more. Nicole, will the conclusion always follow the but? Not always. Sometimes the order will be switched where the premise follows the but and then the conclusion comes after that. So generally, you can expect that after a word like but or however or yet, you'll see the author's argument, but it might be premise conclusion or it might be conclusion premise. Good question. All right, go ahead and give this question a try. Hold on, it's getting a little cut off there, so I'm going to reshare so that you can see it. Okay, go ahead. All right, let's do another poll. All right, thanks to everyone who voted. So here we've got a weekend question, and this falls into a general category of questions that ask you to strengthen or weaken an argument. And oftentimes it's kind of a relative assessment. So it's asking you what most weakens, which means that the more strongly worded a claim is, or the more strongly worded one of the answer choices it is, sort of the more potential for damage it has for the argument, or the more potential it has to strengthen the argument. So it's not a hard and fast rule that, I have to choose an answer with really strong language, but it is something I'll take into consideration. An answer choice that's worded with most is going to be an answer choice that's likely to do more damage than an answer choice that describes something that happens sometimes. So generally speaking, if I'm going to use language strength to guide me, I'm going to be looking for stronger language on these question types. So let's see what happens with this question. So with weaken and strengthen questions, I want to identify the conclusion again. And I see a similar pattern of the but followed by the author's argument on this one. So we get the airlines are over concerned about the comfort of passengers flying in business. They should instead focus on the comfort of leisure passengers. So I'm going to identify sort of this whole thing as the conclusion. They should focus on leisure rather than business. And then we have the premise, which is, okay, those leisure travelers purchase most of the airline tickets. So in order to weaken this argument, since it's a clear sort of either or choice, do I want to focus on business or leisure? To weaken it, my goal is to find something that supports that airlines should focus on business travelers. So trying to say that the author is wrong. So some of these answer choices are probably going to point in the wrong direction. And some of them might support this, but maybe not as strongly as other answer choices, or they might support the premise, but not the conclusion. So let's check this out. Business travelers often make travel decisions based on whether they feel a given airline values their business. Okay, so this one, when I look back up, I do see the word value, but this is just talking about how business travelers value space rather than better meals. But there's nothing to say whether or not business travelers care about how airlines make them feel. And there's also nothing about what airlines are doing to make business travelers feel a certain way. So I don't really think this would impact one way or the other. If this is true, it doesn't necessarily change whether airlines should focus on the comfort of leisure passengers. So I'm going to cross this one off. Answer choice B, some airlines have indicated that they will undertake alterations in seating space throughout the entire passenger area. So this doesn't really distinguish between business and leisure at all. This is for everyone. And I want an answer choice that shows me why they should focus on business travelers in particular. So I'm going to cross this off. This one tells me what leisure travelers do or do not care about. That doesn't relate directly to the conclusion. It relates more to this background information about elbow room and leg room. And we want something that shows us why airlines should focus on business travelers. I'm going to cross this off. D is a good one. So I see a far greater proportion of revenue comes from business travelers than leisure travelers. So this is helpful because it's comparing business versus leisure. It's using strong words, and it's caring about what the argument cares about, which is money. So I'm going to keep answer choice D. Answer choice E, most leisure travelers buy airline tickets only when fares are discounted. This is tempting, but it doesn't compare this to business travelers. So I don't know, that might also be true for business travelers. I don't know how that impacts revenue. So I'm going to cross off E and I'm going to select D. So notice that D does a couple of things well. One, it uses strong language to put a big dent in this argument. So it's more strongly worded than, say, answer choice A, which just uses the vague word often, or answer choice B, which uses the word some, or even answer choice C when it says not the primary concern. It's like, okay, so it's a concern, but it's not a super strong concern. Answer choice D uses really strong language to challenge this overall argument. All right, let me know what questions you have based on this. Good question from Rufus. So Rufus said, can more than one question weaken, or will only one weaken while others do not weaken? The way that I think of it is there are kind of two ways an answer choice might seem to weaken, but not be the correct answer. One way, I don't know, clear off so I can put some space over here because this is really valuable. So one way that an answer choice might do that is it weakens the premise, but not the overall argument, so not the conclusion. So an example of that on this question would be if we were to challenge the idea that leisure travelers purchase 80% of all airline tickets and say something like, one year, leisure travelers only purchased 65% of airline tickets. The reason we don't want to choose that answer is because we're supposed to accept the truth of the premise on all logical reasoning questions. And what we care about is whether, if we know this is true, is that enough to prove the conclusion is true? So an answer choice that just challenges the premise isn't fully addressing the logic of the argument. So that's one example of a trap, is an answer choice that would weaken the premise but not the conclusion. Another type of trap is one where it weakens if I add some steps in my head to it. So for example, answer choice E, I might be able to take this answer choice and add like a little story to it about how, you know, because they only buy them when they're discounted, they're not really like making that much money for the airlines, and maybe business travelers, you know, are funded by their companies, so they're more likely to pay full fare. And so that gives me a reason that they should focus on business. That is, you know, a way of strengthening, but I had to add a lot of stuff in order to make it, or sorry, a way of weakening, but I had to add a lot of stuff in order to make it weaken. So short answer is, a lot of times it will appear that multiple answers do weaken or do strengthen, but you want to kind of sift through it to see if they're really falling into one of these traps. Usually there will only be one answer that clearly weakens the argument. Or if there appear to be a couple, then that's where you might consider language strength. Like, okay, this weakens, but it only uses the word some, whereas this one weakens using the word most. Great question. All right, let's try another one. Okay, go ahead and give this one a shot. All right, let me know what you're thinking. Okay, thank you. So this is an example of a question type called a sufficient assumption. And we know that because of the language, the conclusion follows logically if we assume which of the following. So what that means is that I want an answer choice that if we plug it in, it's going to make the argument perfectly valid. So any gaps that there are in this argument are going to be completely plugged by this statement. It will just be a totally airtight argument. Because of that, it's generally true that you should expect very strong language on a sufficient assumption. The stronger the language, the more likely it is to fully bridge the gap and make the argument perfect. So oftentimes, as you see here, you're going to have several answer choices with strong language in sufficient assumption questions. I see anyone, I see only, I see an if-then statement. And the mistake that people sometimes make is say, oh, I heard strong language is bad on logical reasoning. I don't want to pick an answer choice that's too strong. There's really no such thing as too strong on a sufficient assumption question. There's only answers that are irrelevant or not strong enough. So we want to be able to recognize this question type and know that strong language is basically expected on these types of questions. So once I've got that in mind, I want to then go about breaking down this argument again into its premise and conclusion, like we did with the weekend argument. So I see a pretty clear conclusion marked with the word thus. We're told that thus Murray, we've got some details about Murray. Murray's got a bachelor's and a master's degree, can't be accepted for the position of executive administrator. Why? Murray has a felony conviction and no one with a felony conviction can be appointed to the board. Okay, so there doesn't seem to be a huge flaw apparent in this logic at first. So it's like, okay, Murray has a felony conviction, can't be appointed to the board. This is an example of a very subtle type of gap that we call a term shift, which is where the language changes from the premise to conclusion in a way that's so subtle that our brains don't always notice it. And the way that the language shifts in this particular problem is that our premises are talking about whether someone can be appointed to the board. And our conclusion is saying that Murray can't be specifically the executive administrator. And what most of our brains are going to do here, what my brain did the first time I read this question, was say, okay, this makes total sense because an executive administrator would be a position on the executive board. But that is an assumption. That isn't actually stated in this argument. This argument gives criteria for being appointed to the executive board, but doesn't specify that the position is actually on the executive board. So noticing that very subtle term shift that would probably be kind of like in real life, we wouldn't even worry about this, gets us ready for what we're looking for in the answer choice. So I'm looking for an answer choice that connects the language that was shifted from the premise to the conclusion. So I'm looking for something that makes that connection between being on the executive board or being eligible to be on the board and being eligible to be an executive administrator. And the stronger the connection is, the better. So that is a really helpful trick once I have a good sort of sense in my head of what I'm looking for quickly eliminating answer choices. If I don't see an answer choice connecting those two terms, then I can eliminate it. So let's check out these answers. Answer choice A mentions the executive board, but doesn't make that connection I'm looking for to the administrator, so cross it off. Answer choice B has both, and it's strongly worded, so I'll keep it. Answer choice C mentions the executive administrator, but not the board, so I'm going to cross this off. Answer choice D mentions executive administrator, but again, not the board. And answer choice E mentions executive administrator, but not the board. So the only answer that connects these two ideas, saying yes, being on the executive board is a requirement for being an executive administrator, is answer choice B, which also happens to use some pretty strong language to make this firm connection so that when we plug this in, it's a valid argument. All right, again, let me know in the chat what questions you have. All right, we have time for one or two more questions. So let's give this one a try. All right, I'm going to go ahead and launch a poll. All right, thank you. So we've got a strengthened question here. We saw a weakened one earlier. And when we talked about our weakened question, we discussed how with strengthened and weakened questions, oftentimes we're going to expect to see strong language in the answer choices. And in this case, I see a lot of strong language throughout all of the answer choices. So I see frequently, I see it's difficult for any form, without, only, no form, all. So lots of strong language here. And the main reason I included this problem is just to remind you that strong language isn't always bad. Oftentimes when we're evaluating answer choices, it can be helpful to notice whether there are primarily answers that use strong language or if there's a mix of strong versus weak. If they pretty much all use strong language, then you might not use that language as just a deal breaker by itself. You're going to need to consider it in the context of the argument. So let's take a look at this argument. We have the conclusion that cognitive psychotherapy is more likely to be effective than forms of psychotherapy focusing on changing unconscious beliefs and desires. And the support for that is only conscious beliefs are under the patient's direct conscious control, and cognitive therapy focuses on changing those. So there seems to be a gap here where our conclusion is making a claim about effectiveness, and our premises are talking about whether something is under a patient's control. So I'm anticipating that the correct answer is going to try to bridge this gap between whether something is under a patient's direct control and whether the therapy technique is effective. So let's check out our answer choices. So answer choice A, problems that are frequently caused by unconscious beliefs that could be changed with psychotherapy. So this is an example of an answer choice that actually weakens the argument. We've got a comparison, and the therapist who wrote this argument is falling on the side against forms of psychotherapy that focus on unconscious beliefs. So this does the opposite of what we're looking for. So I'm going to eliminate it. Answer B, it's difficult for any form of psychotherapy to be effective without focusing on mental states that are under conscious control. So this has a lot of what I was expecting. I see effective and conscious control, and it seems to be creating this link between effectiveness and being under conscious control. So I'm going to keep it. C, cognitive psychotherapy is the only form that focuses on changing the patient's conscious beliefs. So when I look back at the text, I see we're comparing two different forms of psychotherapy and saying one is more effective than the other. Answer choice C would be a great answer if I were trying to say cognitive psychotherapy is the best form. Then we would need to prove it's the only one that does this thing that the author thinks is effective. But that's not what we're trying to prove. And so it's certainly possible for there to be other forms of psychotherapy that do similar things and still have cognitive psychotherapy be more effective than psychotherapy that focuses on unconscious beliefs. Answer choice D, no form of psychotherapy that focuses on unconscious beliefs can be effective unless it also helps change beliefs that are under the patient's direct conscious control. So this is a great example of an answer choice that's kind of in the spirit of the question, but doesn't technically strengthen the argument. And the reason that it doesn't strengthen the argument is the argument is specifically trying to make a claim about a type of therapy that only focuses on things that are under conscious control. And it's not making a claim that's saying, like, if you add those conscious control techniques to other forms of therapy, those forms of therapy would be better. It's just trying to say specifically, only the types of therapy that use these conscious beliefs are going to be effective. So answer choice D is kind of addressing the wrong conclusion, a conclusion that isn't stated there. And then answer choice E, all of the patient's conscious beliefs are under their conscious control, but other psychological states cannot be controlled effectively without the aid of psychotherapy. So this is getting into things that are out of scope, where we start talking about other psychological states. So I would eliminate that. So correct answer here is answer choice B, which correctly connects the gap between effectiveness and conscious or unconscious beliefs, and also happens to use some pretty strong language like the rest of the answer choices. All right, it is time for us to come to a close. Thank you all so much for your participation in this session. If you are looking for opportunities to continue your studying with Manhattan Prep, you can check out our classes, which are listed on our website. And as a reminder, you can try any of our courses. You can try the first session for free. All right, take care, everybody. Good luck on your LSAT. Glad this was helpful. We do offer tutoring. Yes, you can reach out via our website to look for tutoring.